Spark Mage shrieked, calling on the rage of the storms of his youth. To his surprise, the sky responded with a fierce energy he'd never thought to see again. This is the flavour text found on Lightning Bolt, the embodiment of Red and one of Magic's most iconic cards. But whilst on the surface Red may seem to be all about chaos and destruction, if you dig a little deeper, you can start to unpack potentially the most diverse colour in the game. Welcome to Magic the Flavouring, the Magic the Gathering podcast, where we talk about all things Magic flavour, design and lore. I'm your host, Andy Mann.
Hello, I'm Nathan Canson.
And we are continuing, chugging on with our Colour Pie episodes. We're now moving on to Red. We've already done the White, Blue, Blacks, and yeah. How are you feeling about it so far?
So far, so good. Yeah, it seems to be quite nice. It's good to check in with the colours, see how they're doing. Make sure they're not malnourished, that are getting all their greens.
Yeah. No, we're on Red today, Nathan.
Okay, well, yeah. I mean, red can eat vegetables.
Yeah, sure. So there's we're quite packed in the MTF offices today. There's a lot of movement going around outside of our recording studio. So if you hear any kind of knocks or voices or bangs or whatever, we do apologise. But
don't be alarmed. We don't live in isolation.
Yeah, we don't live in our own tiny little void. We're just talking to each other forever. Although it does feel like that sometimes.
It does feel like that.
I'm also at the start of a very long day, Nathan. I have got this recording, and then tonight is the Theros Beyond Death pre-release.
Woot, hype.
Woot, hype for the pre-release. I'm well excited. And it's going to be our LGS, Rule Zero in Hackney. And it's actually their opening of their new store.
Exciting times.
Yeah. Previously Magic Madhouse. That was a wicked store.
Yeah, I did like it. It was in the arse end of nowhere.
Yeah.
It was a very nice store.
Yeah, I mean, it's only about 5 minutes just up the road from it now. So it's...
Yeah, so it's like along the canalways. And it had a really good look over everything as well. So I'd be interested to see the new place.
I think it's going to be cool. It's got 3 different floors. Tim Willoughby, Tim Willoughby, who's on the Magic
circuit.
He's part of the coverage team for all the different events. Mm-hmm. He's the owner of the store along with his business partner Gav. So very excited to play that.
Yeah.
All right, enough waffling. There'll be plenty of time for waffling going on moving forwards.
We'll waffle plenty.
We're talking about Red today.
No, indeed.
Now, last week we spoke about Black, which was easily my favourite colour. Mm-hmm. And Black, I think, was fairly well defined, is what we kind of landed on. Yeah. That Black had a very sort of true sense of identity. Mm-hmm. What would you say? I mean, Red. What's it about?
I'd say Red's also got a similar kind of. We had talked about this just before the episode, but there's a chance you can kind of look at white and black on like an apex of morality, on like a good and bad in loose terminology, in the same way green and blue can be looked at on a scale of like nature versus nurture, that where you're born and how your visceral like beastly nature as opposed to your intellect. Like you can look at those, if you look at those as two like scales. Red kind of layers emotion over all of this.
Yeah.
And emotion's kind of a very broad term, but especially throughout the early years of Magic, it was quite easy to look at Red as being a colour of destruction, of anger, of fury, which it does have a lot of representation of. But this also moves more in towards like in general just passion. Like it could be like more emotive rather than aggression.
Yeah.
So as much as you have cards like Incite Rebellion, you also now have cards like Cathartic Reunion.
Yeah.
So I feel like in the same way that Black has moved away from the typical trope of evil cackly to something that's a bit more understandable. In the same way, Red's moved away from the big smash anger fire thing to more I don't know, it feels more empathetic, I guess. I mean it in terms of how their ethos is, that Red's still very much focused on what it wants to do. It just doesn't necessarily do it particularly selfishly. It just does it kind of without thinking.
Sure. I mean, Red, as you say, it did start off with just being all about destruction, all about like, burning things up, which is very much how things are synonymous with this colour. Like we said in our intro, you look at Lightning Bolt's flavour text, or Lightning Bolt being the marquee red card.
Yeah.
It's pure damage, it's pure energy.
Yeah, exactly.
Going in just for destruction and burning things up.
Yeah. And as much as it's not fire, obviously the symbol for Red, and we haven't really talked about this in any of the other ones, but the symbol for Red is a fireball.
Yeah.
And in the same way that the skull for Black kind of denotes to its the way it works around death and the grave. Red very much works within this idea of energy. The manner that manifests in Red is a little bit more obvious.
Sure.
Because lava is a little bit more prevalent than, say, necromantic.
Yeah, it's a bit more relatable in our actual world.
Yeah.
But I think
you can feel Red mana if you go and touch a candle.
Yeah. Oh, do you want to know what Red feels like?
Yeah.
But I think with with red, I think this is something that will become quite clear if you start to unpack it all. But I think whereas, the other colours tend to have quite a well-defined thing, because whatever they are, whether it's, about necromantic selfish energy or about sort of justice and authoritarianism with white or whatever it is, red being the colour of passion and the colour of energy does mean that it can kind of bleed into so many different avenues, and it's very broad.
Yeah, it's more a state of mind rather than a stance that you're taking.
Yeah, and exactly. And when we looked through its different tropes, or maybe even its creature types, I think this idea of red being just the colour of burn or just the colour of aggression actually starts to dissolve completely. And yeah, set by set, I think red, for me, looking at how game designers have designed different sets and how they've used the colour pie to do so, red seems to be very much the playground of these colours. Of what can we do? What can we attribute it to per plane, per set, or whatever?
I think it's also in the same way that we talked a little bit in White of how it needs to diversify its mechanical relevance going forwards into formats like EDH. As much as Wizards won't weight their sets towards that, they will definitely take it into consideration. Red, in a similar fashion, has kind of limitations on the things that it's good at in terms of scaling. Like, they might not scale so well into multiplayer formats so much. And even in limited, you could argue that it has a very basic, or has had in the past quite a basic method of attack. So being able to diversify that and have a look at how like you can pick that apart and make it a little bit more not complicated, but at least giving it some diversity. Is something that they're definitely doing. They're moving quite a few different things in and around like red's like color wheelhouse. So it's quite nice.
Yeah, fantastic. All right, well let's crack on then. So for all the other colors, we've been kind of moving up and down all of their different tenets. I've been saying the word tenants. It's not tenants. It's tenets.
Yeah.
Great.
Oh, I didn't realise.
I've been speaking English my entire life, so there we go. So all of the major tenets of red, and kind of seeing how they're expressed on the cardboard. That is what we're all about here.
Yeah, their values.
Their values. So Nath, take us away.
One of the first ones is the seize the day kind of feeling.
Seize the day. I like that. Yeah.
Like the impulse it has. Red lives for the moment. It will do obviously in terms of we'll talk about some mechanics as well. But if you look at like temporary buffs, the fact that you have to sacrifice things at the end of turn or discard things at the end of turn, that kind of an immediacy. You get this across a lot of different card formats, whether it's sorceries that are adding mana for a brief amount of time, or like a threaten effect for a short amount of time. It will take something in a moment and do it in the most possible way that it can.
Yeah, sure. One that comes to mind is the enchantment Rite of the Raging Storm, which gives you a Lightning Ranger token, which is a lightning elemental essentially that gives it haste. You can attack with it at the end of combat. It gets exiled, and then your opponents also get
one. So everyone gets this 5/1 that attacks, and that has to attack, and it can't attack you. It has to attack someone else. Yeah, it's this idea of instigating chaos, which is another thing that red does very well. But yeah, this idea of this momentary advantage, flash in the pan kind of idea, works very well towards red, because typically it's not focused on the long game.
No,
it's more focused on the short term.
Well, yeah, there's a reason that mono red wins is a card archetype in many formats. Yeah.
Burn and red deck wins are both very quick. They want the game over within like the first 3 or 4 turns.
Yeah.
If it goes any later than that, they're probably not going to win.
Yeah, sure.
So the other thing is, so kind of in a similar vein, is the acting before thinking. This idea that they'll do things before they maybe take into account the consequences.
Sure.
Of it. They will always be the ones that kind of instigate the action. They are the ones that expect the response. We talked about how black and blue are kind of reactionary colours. Red is an action colour.
Yeah.
It really, really wants to get in there early. It wants to start demanding answers of your opponent. It also, in terms of it's quick to anger. So because it's going to have an emotional response quicker than most of the other colours, in terms of gameplay, it does feel right that it's going to have the early aggression, the quick creatures they get in, and maybe it didn't think about turn 6.
Yeah, sure.
So that's fine. That's fine. I'm sure it will find ways around getting there. But it doesn't sit idly by. It's usually doing stuff. It won't. Unless you're playing like a very, very, very instant based burn list, you're not going to sit back on your mana. Like, you're going to be using your mana every turn. You're going to be developing your board every turn. That's the red way.
Yeah, sure.
And then also, so if you're moving away from how stupid red might come across as sometimes.
Stupid.
Well, as in like when you think about the blue will criticize red for the fact that it's reckless and rash in the way that it does things. It has, because that lack of thought process. It might not. This isn't obviously This isn't true for everything.
Okay.
It's just a general trope of red. But also it really respects and has a lot of affinity for freedom. This idea of freedom of expression.
Right.
If you look at, say, Kaladesh, a lot of the rebels and the what were they called? And it was the you had the authorities,
The consulate.
Yeah, and then what were they called? The group that were the rebels.
Oh, great. Rebellion?
Good, we did very well. We've done very well here. Anyway, point being that they are being rebellious against the consulate, and they were trying to fight for freedom. Vive la resistance, as it were.
Well, this is the part of Red that I think is actually one of the most interesting for me, because it does move away from the kind of reckless, sort of almost thoughtless destruction aspect, which things like, you sort of think about lightning bolt or fireball, or maybe when we move into creature types, it's going to look a lot at minotaurs. So the minotaurs of Theros are these kind of mindless, bloodlusted warriors. Whereas, Kaladesh is something where they definitely played with the idea of red. You look at cards like Indomitable Creativity, which is the, I've got it here actually, is the sorcery that for X red is destroy X artifacts and or creatures. For each permanent destroyed this way, its controller reveals cards on the top of his library until an artifact or creature card is revealed and exiles that card.
The mass Chaos War.
Those players put exiled cards onto the battlefield and then shuffle their libraries, and then the artwork is this incredible piece of essentially like magic graffiti, which has the symbol of the sort of resistance group, and it's so far removed from this idea of bloodlust or from reckless abandon, because it's not reckless abandon.
No, it felt
it's
justified.
Focused, almost joyful rebellion. And it's creative. It's creative in a way that, say, maybe blue is seen as being a creative color, but it's creative in a completely different way. And I think when we talk about this idea of rebellion, this idea of seize the day, even it can be in a destructive manner, or it can be in a joyful, almost creative manner.
Yeah, absolutely.
And red is so good at portraying this. I think much better than any other colour.
Yeah, I mean, red would be like, people have talked about how they can move artistry into red's wheelhouse. Like things like look at Felden of the Third Path.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, okay. His mechanic works with returning artifacts or making copies of creatures that are in your graveyard and artificial versions of them.
Yeah.
And obviously it fits massively to his story. Really tragic. Go and look up Felden of the Third Path if you want to have a little cry.
Oh, if you want to see a very sad Father Christmas.
Yeah, God. But obviously the idea is that he's creating. It's a creative colour. And this idea of freedom, this idea of rebelling against the norm is definitely within what red wants. So it doesn't like conformity so much. It wants freedom of expression. In the same way, if you look at the Phyrexians, of all the praetors, the red one was the only one that went, actually, no, I'm okay, thanks. I don't have to join on with you. And obviously that was what allowed that little pocket of resistance in on Mirrodin to survive as long as they did before Phyrexia inevitably and inexorably took over the entire plane.
Well, there's that idea of rebellion. It's the red praetor sort of. It's not potentially being the most destructive colour out of those praetors. The red one was the one that went, actually, this is not freedom. I want to do my own thing. Yeah,
the way they twisted that idea that white was probably the most evil out of all of them, quote unquote, obviously evil.
The most oppressive for sure.
Because it worked towards Phyrexia's orthodoxy, whereas red doesn't work towards orthodoxy. And if anything, the whole point of original Phyrexia was it was kind of just specifically black. And obviously it was a very black based or black mana based I was gonna say cult then, but race, because Yawgmoth in the end embodied black to the point of where he was just a black mana cloud.
He literally was the embodiment of Phyrexia to the point where he was physically the plane.
He became black mana itself. It's ridiculous. But obviously then we go back and have a look and break down into the 5 colours. Like, of course red was going to be the one that didn't fit in. You can look at predation, you can look at like artificial mastery in the Jataxia side of it. You can look at and understand this hierarchy of power in the Sheoldred side. Sure. Like these all make sense. Red's a kind of a very difficult one to fit into this Phyrexian ideology, and thankfully they didn't actually do that. They didn't flex away. They went, actually no, red can be the one that that kicks the trends.
100%.
Obviously we've talked a little bit about this idea of acting before thinking seize the day, but obviously they're quite hasty. It's massively denoted in the fact that a lot of their creatures have haste.
Haste is kind of like the marquee red sort of evergreen
but also,
mechanic.
if you think about it, attacks each combat fable is a very red thing.
For sure.
This inability to stay still, this impetus that red has is almost its downfall. But I mean, realistically, you cannot get away from the fact that red wants to be doing things.
Red creatures want to be turning sideways.
It cannot be kept still. In the same way that they'll usually use a lot of brute force. Whether that's artifact destruction, land destruction, or in general just being big tramply dudes.
Yeah.
It does use a lot of brute force. It does use a few pump effects as well, similar to green. But
the difference though, I was just literally as you're saying trampley stuff, I was like, oh yeah, red does have trample, but I suppose the big difference is red creatures tend to have super high power, very low toughness.
Yeah, really low toughness.
Lots of like 6/1s,
Exactly.
7/2s, and then green is just a big chunkus of a boy.
Yeah, well, if you look at, like, say, Ball Lightning, red for a 6/1, trample, haste, and then you have to sacrifice it at the end of turn. Obviously, it ain't surviving combat.
No.
But it's also a 3
But it will
mana.
do some stuff.
It's 3 mana, I'm going to deal you some damage.
Yeah.
It's a really good embodiment of how red works.
Man, I love red. Do you know, like I said in the last
really
episode,
succinct.
black was my favourite colour, but over the past, I don't know, for some reason, so like the last 3 EDH decks I've built, and it takes a long time to build an EDH deck if you're not as good at building EDH decks, like I'm not as good as other people.
Or if we pay as much attention as we do.
I mean, I suppose that's one way of looking at it. I think I'm just slow. But like the last 3 decks that I've built have all been red. Not necessarily mono red or whatever, but they've all had red as like a big part of the equation. And yeah, I mean, in EDH, it's not even that effective of a colour because it's so flash in the pan.
Yeah.
But it's just so fun. It's just so fun.
It's also really easy to identify with. Like, you talk about like the Timmies of Magic, and they'll probably go for red, for green creatures because they tend to be the biggest, baddest, and it's also a simpler colour to understand because it's also quite combat based. Red's the same way. Like, Grawl's probably arguably the simplest colour combination of Smash. Speaking from someone who has played tight, aggressive decks, it's just as stressful trying to clock your opponent in 4 turns. It's way more stressful than sitting back on your counter spell feeling all smug about yourself.
Way more stressful for you as a player?
Yeah, like, because I've done it, and like Burn players will attest to the fact of there's a formula kind of maybe to the way that they play, because they'll know that their cards are only worth a certain amount of damage. This is red at its purest form, is literally how much damage can I get for the amount of red symbols that I'm casting. And managing that as a resource is really super stressful, because you've maybe only got like 2 points of damage spare. So how are you going to obviously divvy that out? How are you
that's interesting. Like we were talking about in the blue episode, we were talking about how even playing the colour warps the real world, like, act of playing the game and kind of the mind games played. So playing red as the red player, so flipping it back round, it creates this tension, this need to act now and need to get your creatures in for the swing, because if you don't, you're going to lose the game. So playing red actually affects you physically, which I just love. I love when Magic does that.
The flip side of that is the pressure that you feel when you've already got 3 creatures against you and you've only played 1 land. The pressure that you're under. It's
but red can do it. Red can get there. Yeah,
I used to play the Goblin Guy deck of where by turn 2 you've only played 1 land. It's probably a tap land. You've taken 6 damage.
Yeah.
What? And then I'm like, the rest of my hands just burn spells, so I guess you've lost. Good luck, buddy. So I think it's a little bit more. It's much easier to identify with, and even its play patterns, as much as they're not necessarily uncomplicated. In the way that you actually have to close out a game. Like, the simplicity of the cards is quite nice. It's quite evocative and it's quite easy to tap into.
Yeah.
Like, I find that black and blue especially, because their identities might, or even though like the gameplays might be a little bit more nuanced, it's a little bit harder to affiliate yourself with it directly immediately.
Yeah, sure.
Obviously, we've talked about it a little bit as well, but elementals, not only elemental creatures, because they are obviously creations of mana. If you look at like the Flamekin from Lorwyn, they have a bit more substance and form of like a more of a humanoid-esqueness about them. And then you also have elemental mages. So clearly, like, the tapping in, like, these shamans, as they will be, typically. Obviously, you have clerics in white.
You get wizards, you get red wizards
obviously
as well.
You get red wizards as well, but this idea is that they're going to work directly. I mean, it feels more like a wizardy colour. Mm-hmm. In the same way that blue worked with typical magic conventions, red works with a lot of typical shaman conventions, with the tapping into your environment, obviously using the rocks and the fire around you in the same way that blue will use, like, the air and the water.
Yeah, sure. Like, so it's very sort of like, I'm going to use another property now as an analogy, because you do it all the time. It's very sort of Aang, the Last Airbender.
I was thinking,
Avatar.
My head exactly, I was saying that.
Yeah, using all the different elements around you.
Yeah.
But so we were having a conversation off air the other day. I say off air, obviously 99% of all of our conversations are off air.
No, we record everything, and
we record everything.
We trim the bits of our life
Editing
that we don't
is a nightmare.
24-hour process.
I mean, God, the amount of farts and like going to the toilet that I have to edit out, because obviously we're using lapel mics. We were having a conversation.
How did you get toilet humour into this?
Because I'm a terrible human. So we were talking about red and how fire seems to be obviously the primary colour of red, and obviously fire is on the symbol, this kind of lava thing. But you were saying that they use lightning and they use these other elements inside a lot of card art. I mean, things like lightning bolt or chain lightning or whatever else, and like spark mages are red. And I was trying to justify it, saying that makes sense. But you kind of think spark mages could kind of, or weather mages can kind of go into different colours.
Yeah, I believe that it depends on the way you. Well, this is where color ethos and actual like practical magic. I say practical magic as if we're talking about it as if it's real, but it's where there's a big line between it, because it's not necessarily about because you could argue that most like any water mage or weather mage, as we were talking about, should be able to harness the power of lightning and that kind of thing, but realistically that's not kind of the way that a blue mage would work. It wouldn't work to make a lightning bolt. It would create fog to give itself time to have a reaction.
Sure, it would maybe create like a big maelstrom in the sea.
Yeah, exactly.
Or
It might even do the Doctor Strange thing in Endgame, where it controls the water in a big typhoon, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Whereas Red's the one that wants to act like, I don't want to say act destructively, because it's kind of makes.
Well, no, but it's catching the instant of energy.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
If you're a spark mage, or if you're a red mage that deals primarily in, let's say, lightning magic. Obviously, you create the lightning, but that lightning is only like a snap, like it's only a 1 second thing, and you want it to hit hard.
Yeah.
A blue mage wouldn't do that. A blue mage would sort of sit there and think about the strategy of, creating a state of like a board state.
Yeah.
Whereas, a spark mage or maybe a fire mage, it's that passion, it's that instant of energy and channeling it through.
Yeah, looking at, say, Chandra, for example, is a great example.
Oh,
Someone
Chandra
who just
Millar.
goes, fire, kill things. And even then, if you look at, say, Jai, like, Jai is more red than Chandra is. If you look at her actual card, she's got 3 pips, whereas Chandra's only ever had 2 at the most. So clearly Jaya is more of a red mage, but her control over her art, over her fire art, artistry, is significant. Like, it's funny that she's that Chandra's called the Flame Artisan in War of the Spark, when realistically, actually, that's wrong. She's not an artisan at all. She's a little rebel.
Well,
Jai is the one who's got more control
on the cardboard anyway. In the stories, so Chandra will. Well, this isn't about Chandra, even though Chandra is a big part of Red. But my problem with Chandra as a character is that during the Dominaria stories and the most recent ones, they had Jaya Ballard teaching Chandra after it got revealed that Jaya was Mother Lucy. Spoilers, not spoilers.
Yeah.
That on the board.
Thank God you at least got a story at one point.
Yeah, exactly. On the deck of the Weatherlight, they were talking through each other, and Chandra was learning how to control her magic, and that was like a big sort of character breakthrough. We think, maybe we'll see cards with Chandra where it's not just fireball effects or creating an elemental, or maybe we'll bring the elemental thing back, which they did, but it'll be more of a, she's able to control this element. And then on the cardboard and in subsequent stories, which were rubbish anyway, but that's a story for a different time, we will get there. But on the cardboard, Chandra from that point on was still being seen as this big fireball-y mage. So yeah, I'm not quite sure what they did with her there. They did have an opportunity to maybe start making her something more akin to Jaya.
Yeah, and I think that was the idea. I think it would have been quite nice. I say nice, that's really mean. It would have been interesting to see Jaya die off in the War of the Sparks. It would have given gravity.
Oh, 100%.
There are so many walkers.
She should be dead.
There are so many walkers that could have died. Yeah, cool. Bring her back. Lovely, nice, like plot twist on the Luty thing. But okay, now give some gravity to the situation and make Chandra feel like she has to focus. Whereas I still feel like she kind of rebels against her tutor, which okay, is a very red thing.
But there's no character development there.
No, but the point being that the difference between, say, we did it already, to come back to the point.
Oh yeah, sorry, this is a Colour Pie episode. Yeah, I forget. Yeah, sure.
Is that the Spark Mages is the way they express the magic. Like, realistically, I don't think a blue mage, not unlike the original Tim, and how blue did originally have the tap to deal damage effects. I think they realised that
protocol sorcerer.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It didn't aesthetically, it didn't work for blue because it feels too impulsive. And if we're looking at blue as being a patient colour, it's not really likely to use it as an aggressive, destructive thing. Maybe as a last resort. But even then, like Cyclonic Rift is more of a bounce effect rather than the destruction effect. It feels even at its most destructive because Cyclonic Rift is a very destructive card.
Yeah, Cyclonic Rift is an interesting card actually, and we're talking about. Just going back to a previous conversation about talking about lightning and the different elements that these different colours control. The same way that black and white seem to be kind of two sides of the same coin, the same can be said for blue and red, because you have Cyclonic Rift. The artwork on Cyclonic Rift has a lot of lightning motifs and weather motifs. There's a bunch of lands. I know this only because for my Bruderclad Telcor Engineer deck, I wanted all the lands to have sort of be thematic, as you do with all your EDH decks. And the lands I settled on were the Urza Saga lands, and the islands are the islands which have the lightning on them.
Okay, cool.
And they're the only islands I could find that had any sort of dramatic weather effect on them.
There might be some like one. Yeah, I'm trying to think.
I couldn't see any others.
Even
and
like
actually,
even like Esper's ones where it's like dramatic, like cloud. It's not actually like raining. Or anything. There's
and
no
actually, I couldn't find many mountains even with the weather sort of.
Yeah, there's some really weird old ones that, but even then, like they don't have. Yeah,
no, it's not as explicit.
You don't have a lot of weather on them. I guess the whole point is they want the land, not the weather.
Yeah, sure.
But yeah.
So it's just an interesting thought. I don't think that even matters to any point about either colour, but it is an interesting point that they do share some motifs.
Well, I guess the idea is pushing. If you look at Raus Eric, he's a rain mage and he's white. He's blue and red.
Ah, well, yeah. See, here's the rub: is when you start moving to Is It colours, which is your favourite colour pairing by far.
Yeah.
I think that's fair to say. These things all sync up really nicely. Yeah.
I mean, we'll do a 2-colour combination.
Oh God, please no! Like 10 episodes.
Yeah, but we might do it more of a. We might be softer on it. It depends on
do
how
it over the course of 4 years.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, yeah, these colour pairs do obviously sync together quite nicely. Now there is a thing to be said about how each colour interacts with the other ones, where it works together well, and how they butt heads. That's again another whole thing. But yeah, realistically, cyclonic red I think is as far as you as a blue mage you can push your control of the weather before it gets to a point of where it's a red feeling.
Yeah,
and even then it's using overload, which was the Is It set mechanic. So.
Also, I suppose the action of being caught in a cyclonic rift is you being sucked up
rather than
like say like a comet storm where.
Or Star of Extinction.
Star of Extinction, where you're literally just getting blown up.
Star of Extinction. You're literally the collision of a meteorite to destroy it.
Do you know what? I loved Ixalan for all that kind of stuff because it was just some of the
20. Isn't it 20 damage to everything, and you destroy one land, but you deal 20 damage to everything.
That's a great thing about. We were talking in the Black episode about how in Alpha Black had a bunch of card names that were just really literal, but now they've moved away from that. It's more nuanced, and although I'm trying to fight the cause for Red being more nuanced, some of the card names for Red are just like shock, firebolt, lightning bolt, Star of Extinction.
It's very on the nose.
Yeah,
but
it's
again,
great.
that's Red. Like I feel like Red's card should be on the nose. Like as we look at Black, and it's like gloom, darkness, weakness. I'm like, yeah, Black. Yeah. And it does feel the same kind of thing. Well, again, when we get to, because we're going to have a look at the alpha as we have with every
It feels
colour.
very D&D, right? Because whenever, like, the archetypal sort of piss take, if you like, when people are trying to imitate D&D players is, I cast my firebolt. Yeah. It is.
Yeah, it's exactly like that. Yeah, it's a trope for a reason.
Yeah, it's great. Oh,
the only other thing I had down in terms of key tropes, because we've managed to waffle our way around.
Oh, sorry. It's me. It's usually you. It's me this time.
Good job. It's good. It's just put in some more pop culture references and you've got it in the bag. Is commitment. There are no halfways. There are little things like when you see effects like Earthquake or Flame Break, where it deals damage to every creature or to each player.
Right. Red's an all-in colour.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But, I mean, as much as you will have direct damage spells and direct removal spells, like Lightning Bolt and Lightning Strike, and Incinerate. There we go. I found one that didn't have lightning in the name. Incinerate.
Yeah, fire. What a change up.
Hey, look, I mean, what can I say? It has 2 modes and it does them both very well.
I mean, that's fair, yeah.
Yeah, so it does one of these. It'll do things like it will deal damage to it. I mean, they colour shifted Pestilence, which was originally an alpha, which was the enchantment that you pay a black and deal 1 damage to everything and everyone. They've got a colour shifted version of that in Pyrohemia from Planar Chaos. So clearly, that kind of effect is very much in Red's colour pine wheelhouse. And there's this idea of a little bit of damage to everything and everyone.
Yeah, sure.
Because it is as much as it's destructive, it doesn't necessarily have a control over it. Sometimes, like you're the kind of like it's like the genre thing of where if you're going to set fire to something, just set fire to the world in case you miss it.
Yeah.
Like world fire is a good example of something that you remove all permanence from the game, you like discard your hand, you go down to 1 life, like it's mental. And basically the idea is that this guy just sets fire to the entire freaking world.
Yeah.
Which is amazing, because obviously Red Mage Obliterate.
Yeah.
Is another example of this when Baron, deep cut, go and read Baron's. He has a horrible story arc.
So contextualize who's Baron?
So Baron was one of the mages that was back in the original Dominaria. Very, very, very strong, very, very powerful. Tolarian Academy, around during the time of Urza. And I think he loses his wife, he loses his daughter. Like basically, his world turns to crap. He's like the Liam Neeson of magic, and he turns around.
He's the Liam Neeson of magic.
And he basically,
sorry, Liam, you've got an all right life.
Yeah, so Jace was Kanye West, and Baron is Liam Neeson.
Someone spoke to me, but someone listened to that blue episode or whatever episode we were talking about, and you said about Jace being Kanye West, and I went, yeah, did you notice my sort of indignation at that aspect? And they went, yeah, what the hell was Nathan talking about? So I'm justified.
That's fine. That's okay. I don't claim to be on point.
I'm lying. He agreed with you completely. I'm just trying to see that I'm friends.
Anyway, point being that he basically goes. He's in his anger, in his like, because he was a very controlled personality. Like Baron was quite compos mentis when it comes to old walkers, and he basically just sets fire to the world again. He obliterates everything, just destroys. I think I can't remember if it's Taser. Let me have a quick look. I can't remember exactly where he destroys, but he destroys a whole bloody continent just out of rage. So yeah, Red's big spells tend to be really, really super destructive. In terms of like moving away from like general terminology and looking specifically at how it works mechanically. Obviously, we've talked about how it's a hasty colour and lots of quick creatures. Like, it does have a low aggressive curve. Their creatures tend to be quite small at the beginning. They will have above the curve creatures like, say, Goblin Guides, but they'll tend to come with a massive downside. Whereas white creatures and green creatures tend to be more... white creatures tend to just be bigger as they're smaller anyway. Green creatures require more intensive mana costs to get like your 3/2 trample for green. I mean, that for some reason still isn't above curve anymore. Red's creatures tend to have caveats to them of being like, their Jackal Pup was a 2/1 single red drop, but it deals damage to you equal to the damage that it deals.
Okay, cool.
And there's been a few other things like Sata Fire Drinker as well as the same thing, of where it was a 2/1 for 1. Whenever it dealt damage, it dealt that much damage back to you, and you can get a +1 at damage to yourself. It was basically, I'm willing to kill off all my life. It was almost very black, but it felt, instead of like siphoning its own life, it's more like when you're smacking like hitting a steelworks on an anvil. You don't care that you're going to get a few sparks in the face.
Yeah, sure.
That kind of idea. Obviously, it employs damage as directly as possible. It's one of the only colours that really does direct damage. Like black can do loss of life to a player directly.
Yeah.
But, otherwise, apart from the fight mechanic in green, red's the only colour that really does direct damage to things.
Sure.
It's not necessarily destroy effects. It's usually an amount of damage, whether it's 3 damage, 5 damage, blah blah blah. It's quantifiable.
Yeah.
Whereas with black, it'll be you're dead.
I guess that's the way that they express the destruction of red, is that, yeah, sure, in things like white or whatever else, they have these exiled destroy effects, whereas red, if you're burning something literally, or if you're setting something on fire, or if you've like hit something with a lightning bolt, there's still a chance that, say, if it's like a building or something like that, that it's still standing.
Exactly.
It's just in a much weaker state. And I think that's kind of a nice way to express that. Obviously, they do have things like, destroy target artifacts.
With things like Manic Vandal is a good example.
Or like Viashino Heretic. What a great card.
Really, really card.
Which they do destroy things, but yeah, for the most part, this idea is, can you withstand the fireball? Can you withstand the lightning bolt? Yeah.
And these destructions, the way that they destroy artifacts, so they will do this more than enchantments, is that they like to destroy things that have like it's almost like constructs, like it's an artificial construct, and they want to break it back down again. They don't like the fact that it's usually blue mages that have made them, and it's usually the red mages that are breaking them. It's the classic big brother, little brother kind of thing. Just because basically it just doesn't like the conformity aspect of it. And if any colour's going to go around with a bat and break a load of vases, then it's definitely red.
Yeah, sure.
In terms of like its creature abilities, like its evergreens, you've got haste, which obviously allows it to get in super quick. You've got first strike and double strike, meaning obviously that it's attacking first. Again, these are evocative of the way that red is aggressive, mechanically
like
aggressive.
sort of, like thrusting the sword out in front of you, getting the hit in first.
Exactly. Like, it doesn't matter you've got a 3/2 trample of my 2/1 as first strike kind of thing. Like,
sure.
Obviously, this tends to play into the fact that it has larger power to larger power to toughness ratios. Obviously, first strike kind of gets around that. And kind of prevents it from being too much of a downside.
This kind of a overlap with white as well. This is where you get like Boros. Boros is kind of a nice, flavourful kind of joining of those two colours.
Precisely, because it gives focus to the red side whilst also giving impetus to the white side.
Yeah.
It also has Menace. This has moved away from Intimidate. Intimidate actually works quite well with red creatures, because instead of it being like with black, where you're intimidated because you're probably scared at this horrible monstrous thing that's from your nightmare coming at you, it's more a matter of when you've got a screaming shaman running at you, it might take 2 of you buddies to block him, or especially like with the way that they try and put in like two-headed giants and things like that. Obviously,
sure.
that's a very specific trope on the Menace double strike kind of thing.
Menace is an interesting one. So this is kind of leads into a larger point about Red as well, where Red's mechanics or things that Red kind of did before have now become staple mechanics, either keyworded or otherwise.
Yeah.
Where Menace is one of those things. So in my I've got a Grenzo Havoc Razor mono red EDH deck.
Yep.
So that needs to be, it's what all Red's about. So it's little guys needing to get in for the damage, get in for the attack. And one of the cards I run in there is Pyre Heart Wolf, which is 2 and a red for a 1/1 wolf. And it says this is coming from the original Innistrad block. This is whenever Pyre Heart Wolf attacks, each creature you control can't be blocked this turn except by 2 or more creatures. So that's Menace, but before it got keyworded.
Yeah.
So this idea of being only like getting through and having to have multiple people tackle you before you get over the game line has been there for a while. And it's really cool to see that in recent sets, I mean, not even recent sets, I'm talking like now for the past sort of 2 or 3 years, but in relatively recent sets, it's been keyworded, and it's now a staple mechanic. And sure, it's not the only colour that has Menace, but it's definitely the one that spearheaded the idea, and it's the one that I think that flavourfully fits the most.
I think it fits it very well, because the whole point is that black fits more fear and intimidation anyway, because you just don't want to block it, whereas with red, it's more that you need to put a bit more effort into stopping it, because realistically, like red creatures tend to be very aggressive and they're coming at you being very quick, so it makes sense. In the same way that it has, as I mentioned earlier, that must attack every turn if able kind of thing.
Sure.
It has a lot of combat-y base, because it's a combative colour.
Yeah.
So it has a lot of combat-y...
messing with combat.
That kind of thing, exactly. And again, when we look at Alpha, it did that even from the get-go. Mechanically, it also has a lot of tricks. Like it tends to do a lot of has a lot of combat tricks. Again, because a lot of what its gameplay is going to come from the red zone, from the combat step. You do need ways for your creatures to survive.
Yeah.
And this is obviously Menace is another way for your little creatures to get through, to punch through, that little bit of extra reach. Because obviously, from a mechanical point of view and a play design point of view, if you know your colour is going to be really, really quick to begin with, but might fall short at the end, you need to give it a few different ways to be able to weather out. So if other colours are able to shore up their defences, you need those ways that you can kind of get through. Obviously, it has the simple direct damage way of just going over the top and doing direct damage to you, but you might be able to use these effects where you can, like say, fire breathing is another very evocative red like mechanic.
Sure.
And that's the simple ability of paying a single red mana to give the creature +1/+0. There is an enchantment that does this. It's usually present on a lot of dragons because obviously it evokes their fire breathing ability. But it's also a way to allow your smaller creatures. You see this a lot on 2-drops in limited environments these days. Yeah. Although you'll have like a 2/1 and then you can pay say 2 or 3 mana to give it +1 or +2/+0, that kind of thing, where it gives it relevance in the late game. And it allows you to, even if you have to sacrifice one by one these creatures, you will go, right, I'm going to put 10 mana into it. If you don't block it, you're dead. If you do block it, you're going to kill something.
Sure. I mean, so one thing that's, it's not necessarily a combat trick, but it's something I want to talk about because it's one of my favourite mechanics. It's not actually been in many sets, but especially in formats like EDH where you have kind of individual cards that make a big sort of show of it. Goad. Goad, and it's not even exclusively red. Goad is also in blue a lot of the time. So you've got Jeering Homunculus, which is also this. This was a mechanic that I don't know if it was first in Conspiracy, but it's definitely the one which it kind of came from. It was first in Conspiracy.
Yeah.
So it was a red mechanic and a blue mechanic. Now we're gonna you put down here about temporary steel effects, which we'll talk more about in a minute. But this is also something found in blue and red. But would you count Goad as a combat trick of sorts because it's almost like a preemptive combat trick?
So in the loose term, yeah, because the whole point is I'd say it's combat manipulation rather than a combat trick.
So sorry, we should say goad is when if you goad someone else's creature, that creature has to attack on its next turn if able, and can't attack you as a player. So in multiplayer formats,
well, if it can't attack anyone else, then it still has to attack you.
Yeah, sure. So in multiplayer formats, it has to go after other players, but if it's one-on-one, then it has to engage in a combat, which, leads to all different kinds of effects.
Yeah, you don't want your utility creature, coming, like, getting in the red zone particularly.
Yeah, exactly.
I'd put that down under combat manipulation. Like, I think, again, red needs ways to guarantee. Also, the thing about that that's really good is if you goad all of your opponent's creatures, they have to attack, which leaves them open for your attack back.
Yeah, exactly.
It's almost like you're willing to take a hit to try and get through. It also allows you to then get rid of, like, you know, pick off some of the creatures if you are blocking for some reason in red.
Yeah.
But yeah, the idea is obviously it's opening up opportunity to attack back, as well as this idea of because as you say, like a lot of the goad effects are quite flavourfully evocative.
Well, they're brilliant. So the card that I was thinking of when I was talking about the marquee card for this was Disrupt Decorum.
Yeah.
Now, not only is the artwork phenomenal for that, and I think Sam from Rustic Studies in one of his videos was talking about it when he was talking about that artist. That Disrupt Decorum was the one that kind of popped up. But you also have Besmirch, which is a great card which people forget about, which is very flavourful. So you not only goad a creature, but you steal the creature first. So it kind of bleeds things out. You steal the creature, attack with it, it goes back to someone else, and because of the insult of you stealing that thing and then using it, it gets rolled up, gets goaded, and has to attack elsewhere. You know, it's brilliant.
Besmirch is a very nice red effect. I do like that.
It's also got a very cute goblin on the artwork that's just stolen some tomatoes as well.
Like, again, like obviously there are some more generic terms, but I actually quite like generic, like almost like instead of like the new Theros Beyond Death enchantment, Thassa bests the sea god, which does sound like a story because obviously it's a saga. Obviously, it's supposed to denote a story, but I like Disrupt Decorum. I like these terminologies, these concepts that Red very much works within. Like as I said at the beginning, Insight Rebellion. These kinds
so
of
the
effects.
card itself is telling its own story. Yeah. It's not representative of another narrative.
No, exactly. And it's
almost,
and it represents what red is. If you put enough red if you put enough red energy into a room, it's going to go to bed. I mean, it always looks like it's like if the Last Supper went sour. You know, if we found out about Judas the night before, kind of thing. And it does look like everyone's going, and it's great. I love, again, go and have a look at the artwork. It's really, really good. And it's a very clever card. In terms of card advantage, because every colour has to try and get some. White.
White. Give it some card advantage. They didn't even do it in this Theros sets. Oh, Lord.
It's fine. It's okay. They got Heliod. They can get over it. So Red's card advantage typically is in this new impulsive draw.
Impulsive draw. I fucking love impulsive draw. It's enough for an F-bomb. That was like impulsive draw is so much fun. Sorry, go on.
So so it's this way of it draws cards in the same way that, say, blue would. I mean, I'm going to talk about it compared to blue because blue's the only other colour that really does it so succinctly as a comparison. But blue will draw cards full stop. Red will draw cards, or at least exile cards from the top of their library. And there's a couple of cards that do it until end of turn. There are some that do it until the end of your next turn. I think that's going to be the norm going forwards.
Until your end of your next turn?
Yeah, because I think the idea is that until end of turn just kind of puts a downer on some of the cards' functionality, because you only have that window to do it in, but you already used your mana to get that window in the first place.
Yeah, so impulsive draw, impulsive draw usually requires you to exile the top card of your library, and then until end of this turn, or until the end of your next turn, you may cast that card from exile. Yeah. Or some of them, I don't think many of them say play, actually. So if you do a land, some of them say play.
Some of them do, like the new genre from more of the Spartans. There's a couple.
But then there's also impulsive draw. The thing that impulsive draw does brilliantly, which is so flavourful for red. And again, this is something I'm very familiar with because I play a Grenzo Havoc Razor deck, which Grenzo himself has this idea of impulsive draw, is that it's not only off your own library, but some cards will do it off of the top of other people's library. Yeah. So you got Grenzo, for example, does it. So does Rubber of the Rich.
Stolen Strategy.
Stolen Strategy is a fantastic enchantment that does so. Atali, Primal Storm.
Oh, God, I forgot about Atali.
Atali does it where you don't even have to pay mana to do so.
And you can get your own card as well.
You can get your own card. You have to use it in that moment, and if you can't use it... So there have been plenty of times, say, where I've exiled something off the top, and it's someone else's library, and it's been a counter spell. So a fine whiff, whack, whack. Also, in true red fashion, you do tend to get yourself into a pickle. Say if you hit someone with Grenzo, where it exiles the top card of someone else's library, and you exile one of their lands, which you can't use because it's cast, not play, and then they're also screwed on mana, and they look at you like you've just slapped them in the face. So it does get you into trouble, which is the most red thing ever.
Exactly.
I've done it to you. I did it in a game the other day where someone was sat on 2 lands for 5 turns, and then I exiled their next land drop, and for the rest of the game, they didn't speak to me. So, sure. But it's not my fault. It's random. It's chaotic.
And then you get angry when I try and counter the cultivate that you stole from someone else.
I stole someone else's cultivate. This is a perfect story as an example of how great this mechanic is, this impulsive draw. I was playing Grenzo, we're in a 4-player EDH game, and I was mana screwed. It was like turn 7 or 8, and I was stuck on 3 lands, which in Grenzo isn't the most crippling, but I could not advance my board position. People will leave me alone because it's EDH and because we're not arseholes, or Most of us aren't arseholes, Nathan. And I looked to the guy to my left, a dude called Tim, and I was like, dude, I need to get some card advantage. Can I please just attack him with a bunch of 1/1s? Can I see what you've got? Maybe cast something. And he was like, yeah, sure, because Tim's not an arsehole. So I attacked him in with about 3 or 4 different creatures.
He's playing Anima, by the way.
He was playing Animar, but it was a fair Animar deck, if there is such a thing. I attacked into him. I flipped the top 3 cards of his library, top 4 cards, and there was a Cultivate. Brilliant. I had 3 mana left open. Tap 3 mana, cast the Cultivate, and then Nathan goes to counter the Cultivate.
I go to do a Narset's reversal. So
Narset's reversal.
So not only would he not be able to get it, I'd get it, and it would go back to Tim's hand.
Now, this was so heinous that Tim, the guy who I attacked, the guy whose Cultivate I stole...
The one whose Cultivate is going back to the hand.
Yeah, he didn't even want the Cultivate. He counted your Narset's reversal.
It was that much of a dick play.
And then for the rest of the game, it was hilarious. Like most things you do, they're hilarious whilst also being reprehensible. Yeah. But I'm not gonna lie. Like, obviously, that was about a year ago. We're still friends, but there was a good week where I was fuming.
It's like, I cannot believe you're going to do that. I was like, can you really
but
not
no,
believe
but then when
I was going to do
back
that?
to you, I explained it back to you like 2 or 3 weeks later when we were talking about something else, and even you went, now with a bit of perspective, that was a dick thing to do.
Yeah, see, now I've got enough perspective to find it funny again. So it's okay. It swings and roundabouts.
But all right. Impulsive draw.
Point being,
is fantastic.
Yeah, you get, so basically Red's getting this is this idea that it can draw, but it only has it for a set amount of time, whereas blue can obviously draw and keep those cards forever. Black can draw and keep those cards forever, but it costs them life. And then green tends to do it based on its creature base. It also has the opposite effect of looting. So looting being a blue effect of draw a card and then discard a card as one action. The whole point is that you're accumulating the knowledge first, then deciding what you need and getting rid of afterwards. Red does the opposite. It does rummaging.
Yeah.
Which we say looter and looting and rummaging because there was Merfolk Looter and Goblin Rummager.
Was that what Faithless Looting? Does that come into it?
Face looting technically is... Oh, actually, yeah, face looting because it's draw first and then discard after.
Sure.
Yeah. Obviously, typically, Red doesn't... There's a lot of cards that red will do that will do the same kind of thing with blue, where it's not technically card advantage, it's card selection.
Yeah.
And it does it because of rummaging. It will discard first, and then it will draw after. So not only can you not do it if you're empty-handed, but you also kind of don't know what you're going to get. You kind of have to risk getting rid of something that you might need without knowing that the thing you're going to draw is something you actually need. So you might be throwing away gas for a land.
Yeah.
In your avarice, your greed of something better.
But this is this idea of like the chaos element.
Yeah, it's the rummaging,
freedom,
like you're
the
throwing,
creativity.
Yeah, you're throwing everything out of the chest, and then eventually maybe you find something at the bottom instead of going bit by bit, methodically.
Yeah.
Red isn't methodical. In
No.
any way, shape, or form.
It dives its hand into the toolbox, and if it gets cut up by all the razors in there, at least it grabs the hammer.
Yeah, wonders why there's a knife sticking out of it.
Yeah,
when it
exactly.
pulls it back out again.
I need this thing. Oh my lord, my hubris.
And then obviously moving into temporary steel effects.
Temporary steel effects. Oh.
Red is the threaten colour. Literally, the card threaten is a red card.
Is that why they call it threaten effects?
Yeah.
I'm so bad at magic. Why am I doing this podcast? I did not know that.
Well, the thing is, a lot of these terminologies, like most people don't, like some people won't know what Bob is or what Tim is and that kind of thing. Like these are naming conventions that are put onto cards, like Gary for Grey Merchant of Asphodel. Like there are colloquialisms that are widely known in the magic community, and some of them are specific to your local group. Some of them are just very worldly known. Obviously, some of them are very simple because they're based on like old champions that made the cards.
Yeah.
So some Simulacra and Bob and that kind of thing are specific people. Threaten and basically usually if there's a marquee effect. And it's been coined as a phrase like mill. The reason why it's called milling is because of the card millstone.
Yeah.
That's the only reason why it's called milling. Otherwise, it wouldn't be called milling whatsoever. It'd be called, I don't know, grinding if it was grindstone first. Also, there is a grindstone, but that came out afterwards. So point being that, these you need. I mean, we're geeks at the end of the day. The magic community wants to coin phrases to make it easier rather than having to digress all the time.
Sure.
So these threaten effects that it has, where it will take your opponent's. It's typically a sorcery. Every now and again, it will be an instant. But typically, it takes your opponent's creature, untaps it, gives it haste, and then you have to give it back at the end of turn.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, this is the idea of instead of it being like blue where you're or black where you're dominating the opponent's mind and stealing their thing permanently, it's inciting anger and rage in the creature, and obviously turning it against its own master. And the idea of threaten is that you're strong arming them.
Yeah.
In the same way that Red used to have intimidate, is that kind of idea of like, oh, if you don't do this, I'm going to sucker you.
Yeah.
And it might not actually want to sucker you, but it's a bully colour. Like even in if you look at Magic Origins, Jace's story talks about him and he's a kid and he's being bullied, and the bully is a red card.
Sure, yeah.
So I can see if I mean I wouldn't expect black to be I'd expect black to be too spineless to be a bully. You know, like I'd expect them to be the weedy Slytherin kid. I mean, as much as Malfoy was a bully, like I would expect them not to have like the strength and the muster to like. I'd expect green and red to be the bully colours. You know,
sure, they're kind of jocks.
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. And it has this effect in various different ridiculous different ways, but usually it's temporary, unless you have something like Atali Primal Storm, which is obviously the far end of that scale. Obviously it's a primal storm, so it is like the avatar of lightning, as it were. So this idea of that you get to cast and keep them, but again, as Andy just said, like it's a matter of timing as well. Typically, you only have it for a certain amount of time. Then speaking on this like certain amount of time, Flash and a Panic thing is ritual effects. Now, we talked about this in Black, about how Dark Ritual originally from Alpha was put a black mana in to get 3 black mana out.
Yeah, sure.
Sorcery.
And that was the black way back in Alpha.
Yeah, and they've had a few other ways that have done it in Black, but then they've definitely moved that across now. They moved it across into Red. And a really good way of looking at it is Brightheart Flamekin.
Brightheart Flamekin, yeah.
It's a really good example. I think it's a 2/1 or a 1/1 for 2 mana, and then you can put 2 mana into it to increase its power, and then I think it's also give it trample. And then if you use that ability 3 times, essentially putting 6 mana into it, you, as well as getting the effect on the creature, you also get 8 mana back out again. Yeah. And it's 8 red pips, and it's the first time when I was younger seeing this many symbols in one place. Obviously, they've done this more recently with Irencrag Feet, things like that. But the idea being that the more you stoke the flames, the bigger the fire gets. Yeah, sure. Obviously, fire is not permanent. When you look at like the rituals, like Poetic Ritual, which is 1 red to get 3 red out, and again, like they've scaled it a little bit better as well, because Storm was a massive deck. Yeah. And obviously they could chain these ritual effects into each other, generate a massive amount of spells cast in a turn, and then go off with something like a Grape Shot. Like Storm's a really good example of red going ham. The only thing is it needs blue to focus it a little bit, otherwise, it doesn't quite get there. Yeah, sure. And when you talk about that evocatively in terms of flavour and mechanics, it works quite nicely. But I mean, Storm's a really, really good example of red just trying to throw everything temporarily together to get this big effect, and it's done. It's over. And it was that. And if you survived at the end of the turn, well, they're not doing anything else. That was their game plan. It's over. They've lost. But yeah, this idea of temporary mana advantage as well as temporary card advantage is very red. And then the other thing that I really like about Reds that seems to be a trope is that it keeps getting these big crazy enchantment and sorcery effects. Yeah. There is always typically in a given set some wacky backy, more like 5+ converted mana cost red enchantment or red sorcery that just does something stupid.
It's usually more trouble than it's worth as well.
It's usually really complicated. It's usually something random base or something obscure like that. It's the kind of thing that Nathan loves shoving into an Akusa deck just to infuriate everyone that plays with him.
So you're talking about things like Possibility Storm.
Possibility Storm, yeah, Scrambleverse, Thieves Auction.
What's the one? Warp World?
Warp World? Yeah, that's the last one I had to go. Yeah, Warp World. Yeah.
Jeez.
Basically, like, they're kind of like the Great Aurora, and cards like that, where they take all the permanents that are in play and they either randomly distribute them or you shuffle them back in, you randomly take cards off the top, and it basically randomizes the board in this big chaotic effect. This idea of chaos, we haven't actually touched on it very much, but chaos is massively a red wheelhouse as well. I think it's the only colour that accepts not knowing kind of the outcome of things.
Well, sure, I mean, this doesn't fit in with the enchantments, but now you mentioned Chaos Warp is one of the big red removal cards, because it's nothing to do with damage. It's an exile card, exile permanent. You shuffle that permanent into the library and then you flip it off the top. Yeah. This year, I've cast Chaos Warp 4 times, playing at LGS. Twice, the same thing has come back. Yeah. Mathematically, that is bonkers.
Yeah, it was
absurd.
It was the game where we were playing against a Golos deck, and Golos deck was doing all the normal fair Golos things that it does.
Sure, yeah.
And somehow had an Omniscience in play, because obviously it does. And we Chaos Warped it. He was shuffling for a good minute. I cut the deck and cut it directly back to Omniscience. So clearly Golos deserved it and needed to have that in play. We all died very, very quickly after, so it wasn't too bad. But like Chaos Warp. And that's the thing, is that's the most red thing in the world. It's like, oh, and now actually it's the same thing. Oh, who'd have guessed? But yeah, like, it does have all these really big crazy effects, because if red feels like it can get away with having the crazy effects that feel a little bit like, well, I don't know what's going to happen. You know, none of the other colours can really kind of get away with that. And you can move, like blue has it a little bit when you have like wizards that go too far, like the crackpot wizard that's kind of gone a bit senile, and that can make sense in that regard. But typically, otherwise, red's the colour that's going to have all the weird nonsense, the crazy things.
A recent one, which was the effect wasn't too crazy, but it was a very red and charming, was Experimental Frenzy from Ravnica Allegiance.
Yeah, and also Fires of Invention, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Really, and also Aggressive Mining as well. Actually, red in general does get these weird, as far as a colour that doesn't really interact with enchantments very much whatsoever. It does get these weird, like these enchantments that put the game on a slightly different axis. Like Experimental Frenzy is really great because it allows you not to play with cards from your hand, and then Fires of Invention doesn't allow you to play more than one spell a turn, or like
Experimental Frenzy is also very good for red because it gives it removal, because it removes itself. So red got a little bit of enchant removal.
Well, yeah, and that's Good. I like that. That was an applause there.
Zip.
So mechanically, that's kind of like where it is. Again, we do drive-bys of this, very waffly drive-bys, but we're doing drive-bys of these. So, I mean, obviously it does have more depth to that, but those are like the big, obvious ones.
Yeah.
In terms of creatures, obviously now looking at its creatures and how it identifies itself on the battlefield, on card and on paper. Its marquee, its two very, very predominant marquee creature types are, of course, Gobos and Dragos.
Goblins and dragons, for those of you that don't speak Nathan.
And then there's also elementos, and those are the elements.
Elementos.
Yeah. Well, it doesn't matter. I was going to say, I know, because you got the fire elemental, you got the water elemental, you got
the faux elementos.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Fire elementals, good.
Anyway, so yeah, goblins are massive. Again, all the way back from Alpha, and they're on the Nathan tribe. Nathan likes goblins.
I mean, they are really the embodiment of almost everything Red wants to be doing.
Yeah, they are silly. They're a little bit. I mean, go and read some goblin flavor text if you want a good time, especially from older cards. They're all very, very strange. Yeah, very cute.
They're gleeful in what they're doing as well.
And then you've seen them all the way from that weird gleeful typical Dominaria kind of goblin all the way down to like the Mirrodin goblins look weird. There's a lot of different ones.
The Mirrodin goblins are terrifying.
Yeah, you've got the monkey kind of pirate goblins from Ixalan.
Yeah.
You've got the red caps, obviously recently from Eldraine, that don't look very nice and inviting. And you go back to, I mean, I started playing in Lorwyn, and as we said in one of our other episodes, me and my mate used to split the cards up based on colour, and I ended up with all the black and red cards, and obviously black was the goblin colour in Lorwyn. And they, if anything, even though they were less, like, they were more swampy, obviously because they're black, not red. They actually were more ridiculous as black creatures than the red reckless. It was more that they turned that silliness and they pushed it all the way to 11.
Yeah, they were bizarre.
They were absolutely.
One of the goblin designs I like is from Kylum, which is the battle bond plane. They're very traditional fantasy goblins, but they have these massive like elephant ears.
Yeah, I know.
They're really cool.
And they had one of their ones was the cheering.
Cheering Fanatic?
Yeah, Cheering Fanatic.
Yeah, which had the helmet on for the Night Legendary.
Yeah, exactly, which is really nice. Really nice. Obviously, dragons are its iconic big creature. Typically, every colour will have a typical big creature, a typical small creature, and a typical big creature.
Yeah.
So for green, for example, it tends to be like elves and hydras. For white, it'll be, I want to say humans because humans is because it is technically a subtype. But it'll be like humans and angels.
Yeah.
Whereas red, it's goblins and dragons.
Yeah. I mean, you do get dragons in every color, but I agree. Yeah, dragons are red.
Yeah. I mean, even in Khans, like it felt right because again, you're factioning it. In the same way that in Kaladesh, artifacts felt okay in black and green because you're factioning it. You have to. But reds, obviously is the color of fire. And dragons are almost like, they're not like angels and demons where they're the literal embodiment of the manner.
No, but they are born of it. In most fantasy tropes, dragons are born of fire in some respect.
Fire, exactly. Yeah, unless you're like Corval and you're cursed.
But then you can get that. I mean, Throne of Eldraine. This is another whole tangent, another whole episode. But Throne of Eldraine really did well of playing to those fantasy tropes, but also changing them around. Yeah. But then Corvold Fakehurst King is the card. He is a Jund. He's green, black, red.
Yeah, green,
but he
black,
still
red,
feels very red because of the way that he's kind of got this freedom now. He has his own kingdom outside of the courts, and he's doing whatever he wants to do there.
Yeah, I've just realised that they didn't really do the George and the Dragon, but then I realised that's not Arthur because it's a different name. So
George and the Dragon is as in Saint George and the Dragon.
Yeah, like they didn't do the knight fighting the dragon trope as well. They did.
They did a couple of cards.
They had righteousness, obviously. Yeah. Anyway, it was so good at the waffle. It carries on with other types: giants, dwarves, minotaurs, Viashino. This is like the lizard people. Phoenixes. and Helions are the kind of main ones that I've put down. Giants, dwarves, minotaurs, these are all actually in goblins and dragons also are in alpha. So I mean, and they're still these are all types that, apart from dwarves, these are all types that are actually still in the current core set. So they haven't really lost identity. And if anything, when we have a little look at alpha, they're very red creatures are actually really good at being typically red.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's a nice, easy. It's an easy slice of pie to kind of draw and make and flesh out. Obviously, the Helions are like kind of like a cross between elementals and hydras.
Yeah, there's
Phoenixes are
Helions.
the embodiments of fire, rebirth. The Ashino obviously being like lesser dragons because they are lizard folks, and then
the Ashinos are cool.
It tends to be like the angrier kind of animals, like a species. Like giants and minotaurs tend not to be the happiest of people.
Yeah, like things like giants and ogres. Yeah, you're right. They do mostly fall into red, especially ogres.
Yeah,
which is interesting. I kind of want to see more to do with the ogres. I want to see. So where's Kazul, Tyrant of the Cliffs? From?
That's Zendikar.
Yeah. I kind of want to see him come
cool.
back because that's like ogres are kind of seen as being sort of big and dumb, but they do still have a society.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of orcs. I mean, now we've got ogres, orcs, goblins. It's turned to Lord of the Rings a little bit. Like we have all these different factions that aren't quite the same, but are the same.
Well, I suppose you could say that about Nagas and snakes.
Hey, we got our Nagas and snakes reference.
Oh my
god!
God,
fantastic! You did it this time.
I did it to myself.
Yeah. How about the Lamia? Lamia from Theros Beyond Death.
The fact that in Theros Beyond Death they've done a snake Lamia that is so clearly a snake person.
No. Did you know that there's also this thing where they've done the dryad nymph, even though all nymphs are dryads, and that kind of. And there's don't,
I didn't even notice that.
Don't. It's funny. It's like calling it a bird raven.
Yeah. Are you a Homo sapien human?
Yeah.
Exactly. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. Cool.
Good job. So then looking at classes, this
bird haven. Bird haven.
This is where it becomes a bit more obvious, like of their like the way that they are, not just what they are. You've got barbarians, berserkers. You've got pirates, warriors, like you are, as you can see, aggressive classes. You also have shamans, which is kind of their like, you do get wizards, you get a lot of red wizards, but typically that's because red and blue work with that typical mage wizardry that we've talked about before quite nicely. But they tend to get shamans as well. They tend to be the ones that can speak to the elements, that kind of thing. You also have artificers. We haven't really touched on it whatsoever at all, but red does have a massive swing, lean into artifacts. It does have a lot of artifact destruction. It is the primary artifact destruction.
Well, we spoke about it quite a lot in the blue episode about how blue and red tend to be the artifice colours, and blue tends to be the artistry of this artifice, kind of doing delicate. They're like the watchmakers, whereas the red artificers are the ironmongers. They're the welders. They're the forgers of weapons.
Exactly, creators, as it were. And you look at Tornos, which is a recent printing of an old character, and he was red and blue.
Urza's Apprentice,
yeah, Urza's
right?
Apprentice, exactly, which copies an activated ability of an artifact. And it's obviously recently it's got knights. Knights have been massively into not just because of Eldraine. Obviously, the Brawl deck had a lot of red knights in, and there have been a fair few red knights across Magic as well. Like there was the Dragon Soul Knight from Alara, where it was like a 2/2 first strike, and you could pay one of each color.
Was that a mono red card?
Technically, yeah, but then you had it had a 5 color ability to turn it into a dragon, essentially. But the idea being that there are knights in red. The thing is, it doesn't tend to be quite so noble, so it doesn't quite work as much. Like if you look at some of the ones from Eldraine, it's more that they're fervent in their desire to
they're almost like athletes.
Yeah,
exactly.
And also looking at athletes, if you look at Theros in general as well, you've got those kind of, it works for those as well. Like people that are kind of, I don't want to say passionate about what they do, because essentially that is what red is, but this idea of bettering oneself kind of almost for the sake of it. Like
it's not a job. It's not a job the same way that it is for black and white. It's an obsession. They have to be.
Yeah, like they're the ones that will sit there and spar more, like just for the fun of it, as well as the training purposes. So yeah, in terms of creature typing, like it's fairly succinct. Like you don't get many outliers. You even have things like Jin, which is quite funny, like frenetic Efreet. But again, that's because red and blue's wheelhouse can be quite similarly tied, especially with things like elementals.
They're
and that
less
kind
of Genie of the Lamp Jin and more kind of trickster spirits. Yeah,
precisely.
Yeah,
and like even if you're looking at, say, we're going to move on in a second just to the current core set. How elementals are. If you look at much, there are a couple of goblins in the set. It looks like elementals are the marquee creature type for red. part of that comes to do with the fact that it had Chandra synergies, and it was the Chandra set. So obviously there's a very big focus on the kind of magic that she'd have. Being like, Chandra's Outrage and Chandra's Spitfire and that kind of thing. They are all elementally kind of cards. Elementals can be in other colours, like Yarok is literally a Sultai, Sultai elemental. But typically, because they are manifestations of mana, fire is obviously a very easy one to manifest. So.
Doesn't take much to get the spark of mana to make it something that's sort of living.
Yeah, exactly. There's
already halfway there.
Yeah, it's already got that. It's almost like fire's alive as it stands anyway. So it's about if you can contain that and put that concept into and give it some heart and some drive, then absolutely, yeah. I mean, that's why elementals are so rife and so easily ported.
Yeah.
So as I say, looking at the current state of red as we are, if we take a little snapshot at the current core set, obviously there's lots of Chandra. What does this say? I mean, you can argue that because she's quite key in the story at the moment, that they probably want to just focus on. And also, they've done a couple of this before in like the games. Duels of the Planeswalkers had a bit of a focus on Chandra, and I know that they want to do this series going forwards. I can't remember.
The Netflix show.
I think did it get cancelled?
No. So what it was the IDW Comics.
Yeah,
got pushed back, and they finally released issue 4 about a year after they said they were going to. The is it the Coen brothers?
Yeah,
the Coen brothers are attached to do the Netflix show, and it's going to be.
As far as I'm aware, they're still doing it. Obviously, this whole. We're not going to get into it too much, but the whole Nissa Chandra thing that was put to bed, I think, has a lot to do with how they want to handle her character going forwards.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's also probably why there's a lot of Chandra in the latest core set, because it gives everyone a port and everyone will recognise her going.
Yeah,
forwards.
it kind of replaces Jace as being the front runner character.
Yeah, exactly. Which is she's much more, and also if you look at like what kind of character she's like, and it shows her through her progression from like apprentice through to walking inferno. The idea being that she has she can have this ability to create elementals in the same way that Jace can make illusions. You don't really see it much in the cards, but you have seen it more now in the Chandra effects.
Yeah.
It still has one of our marquee cards like Chandra's Outrage and Chandra's Spitfires, as I said. These are actually very, very definitive red cards, and it kind of works more to. It feels like M20 was solidifying what each color did again. A little bit.
Well, yeah, because it's kind of coming at the end of the big story arc for War of the Spark.
Yeah, and they weren't going to stop doing core sets. And then they've brought, obviously, they're I think not doubling down on them, but
no, I think that they're kind of locking them in to stay, especially if they're toning down some of the story elements in other sets.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think the core set 20 did a very good job at just kind of reminding people, going, this is what these colours do, because especially it was kind of coming out around the same time as War of the Spark was coming out, and War of the Spark was a very dense and very creative set. Yeah. So I think they wanted something that was very cookie cutter magic, which is good. It's a good thing to have.
If it was your first set to come into War of the Spark, then you might not have any. I mean, you probably don't have any idea what the hell is going on.
Yeah, sure.
Or what is all this mass nonsense? In terms of typography, the goblins, the dragons, the elementals are all very present in in M20. It also has lots of removal. It is probably it still has Shock, has Flame Sweep, Reduced to Ashes, even Ember Hauler, which is a red 2/2 goblin that you can pay 1 and it can deal 2 damage to a target of your choice, whether it's a creature or player. So it has lots of ways to deal with things. Sheathen Dragon. It's still reprinted in M20, which is really nice. We'll get to that in a second. There's quite a few pump effects and go wide rewards. So there's a couple of plus. There's a +3/+2 for a red in the set, as well as things like Scorch Spitter, which is a 1-drop that's a 1/1 when it attacks, it deals a damage. And you've got Scampering Scorcher, which is a 1/1 elemental. When it comes into play, it makes 2 more 1/1 elementals. And this idea of you getting lots of little bits of indirect damage, and which helps a couple of the other elementals that are in the set kind of get pumped up and beef over. The idea of red in this set is very much get in early with little drops, and then get your final bit of reach with maybe your flying creatures and your removal to get you there. So it's very succinct. It's really nice and clear. Obviously, core sets these days aren't going to be complicated in any way, shape, or form, because they're not. They're a core set. It's going to be for basic players and beginners. So
yeah.
It does reward you for having for wanting to blow things up and attack a lot, which is exactly what Red should be wanting to do.
Sure. We're running a little bit over now. We're already at 1 hour 8 minutes. So you have 5 minutes to talk us through Alpha.
Good. Okay.
Can you do it? Can you do the Red thing of taking the reins and just gunning for it?
Yeah, because actually, surprisingly, everything I just said about the core set is pretty much true for the for Alpha. It has a fair bit of creature removal. It has Lightning Bolt, Fireball, Disintegrate. These are all very distinct.
All the classics.
All the classic red spells. It has Earthbind, which go and look at Earthbind if you want to look at a very risque magic artwork.
I'm going to look it up right now.
Go and have a look at it right now. It's very interesting. And does 2 damage to a creature with flying, and it loses the ability of flying. It's an enchantment that deals damage on enter the battlefield, which is very strange, but obviously Alpha loved its strange enchantments. It also had Earthquake. So if you're looking at a lot of the cards that are still known today and still get played and still used today are still around all the way back in Alpha.
Oh wow! They do not make magic artworks like that anymore.
No, they don't. No.
Quinton Hoover. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Look it up.
Yeah, look up Earthbind. It had Wheel of Fortune. It was the only other. So
Wheel of Fortune.
Yeah, it was in Alpha.
Yeah.
So this ability to draw. Obviously, it did it for everyone. So obviously, it plays to this idea of red gets draw, but it gets draw at a caveat of. This one isn't like a time-based one. This is just a matter of both of you get it.
Yeah.
It had obviously this is Alpha. Every color had land destruction, but it had Stone Rain, which is direct 2 red, 2 and a red to destroy a land. In the same way that Sync Card was black to destroy a land. So it needs less. It requires less red investment to destroy a land than it does black.
Land destruction.
Also, I thought it had Boil in this set. I was wrong.
When does Boil come in?
It has Flash Fires. So destroy all planes, not destroy all islands.
So this one, it had destroy all planes, and then they thought in later sets they went, do you know what red doesn't have enough of? Destroying specific kind of land. Yeah. Let's just give it Boil.
Yeah, well, because
that's
green,
heinous.
Yeah, I know. Well, green has choke for islands as well. So Boil. So Blue does get dicked on a little bit, but then again, blue's a dick, so it's fine.
Yeah, I don't think we need to cry too many tears for
exactly.
blue.
So it also has a lot of combat restriction. We're talking about how like it has combat manipulation these days with goad and stuff like that. It had quite a bit of it in Alpha. Smoke, players can only untap one creature a turn. It's quite nice, locks down the board, allows you to have just your Sheevan Dragon on tap, and then they don't have a Sheevan Dragon. It has a Raging River, which is a very strange card. If I only have 5 minutes, I'm not going to have time. But basically, it allows you to divide your opponent's blockers into 2. Go read Raging River. It's an absolute nonsense of a card, but it's a real weird, strange combat manipulation. Same with False Orders. There's a few different cards in Alpha that worked with changing how combat worked. Typically, you'd expect it to have aggressive creatures. Even in Alpha, no. They would just on curve or just behind the curve. So
that's interesting.
Hill Giant. So a 4 mana 3/3. So it's Sedge Troll. It's a 3 mana 2/2. It has 3 mana 2/3s, like all really solid but pretty unimpressive.
Yeah.
So it kind of relied. Its creatures weren't necessarily getting any bigger. It's a solid creature base. It also had Sheevan Dragon. Sheevan Dragon from all the way back in Alpha, the marquee card, the best card that you would happily day in day out trade your Black Lotuses for.
Yeah.
You'd be like, yeah, if you want my Black Lotus for a Sheevan Dragon, have them all day, have the rest of my collection.
Yeah, sure.
Give me that dragon. It's the only card in the set that has a different color mana symbol on it. So Sedge Troll is a 2/2 that I think it's +1/+1 when it has when you control a swamp and you can pay black to regenerate it.
Oh, that's interesting. The only multicolored card.
The only card in the set that kind of denotes that you can play multiple colors together, which is very interesting.
That's cool.
Really interesting. It has the card literally Fire Breathing. An enchantment for a red that you can then pay an additional red to give +1/+0, and you can do that as many times as you want.
That's been a staple for the entirety that red's been around.
Because you've also got Dragon Whelp in the set, which is 2 red for a 2/2 that has Fire Breathing, but you can only use it 3 times, otherwise you have to sacrifice the creature at end of turn.
Oh, that's sad.
Or you can only use it 3 times. I don't think you have to do the sack at end of turn. But it's only a Dragon Whelp. It's not a proper G, because what you have is you have the actual ability...
the dragon dies after it breathes too much fire.
No, I think you can only use it 3 times in a turn. I think it's a limitation. Because they've reprinted it, and I'm pretty sure it says it's only until you can only use it 3 times during a turn.
But sure, but it's a baby dragon.
It's a baby Sheevan Dragon. And then obviously Sheevan Dragon grows up, which also is a 5/5 for 4 red that has a fire breathing ability. And then in the set there was the ability to give any creature fire breathing. So it's quite interesting. Orcish Aura Flame is an interesting card as well. Attacking creatures get +1/+0 for 1 and a red. It was supposed to be 3 and a red. They misprinted it. So for 2 mana, you have this lovely Anthem effect. And if anything, I think that's what red should go back to. It should have these 2 mana attacking effects. Like Berserker's Onslaught's fine and everything, giving all your attacking creatures double strike, but it's 3 red.
Oh man, Berserker's Onslaught is crazy expensive for what it does, really, if you think about it.
Yeah. Also, it had Shatter in the set. I looked over a green, doesn't have Naturalize. So Disenchant and Shatter are kind of like the only 2 like clear, distinct ways to destroy.
So green in this set didn't have Naturalize. But red did have a Naturalize.
Well, no, it has Shatter. It has Shatter. It can't do the enchantment thing. And then white was one that had Disenchant. White to destroy.
That's still something that red does.
Yeah. It still has that these days. I mean, this is the thing. This is why it's going to be an easy, quick one, because none of the things that it's doing here are actually outside of what it does already.
Yeah.
And it's very similar. All of the creature types are the same kind of creature types. It's got giants. It's got a couple of ogres. But it's got goblins, dragons, giants, minotaurs. It has a minotaur in it in the set, so it does set this. It sets it very, very succinctly for all of the different things that it wanted to carry on doing, and it hasn't really changed much on doing that. The other thing that I like about Alpha is it doubles down on the mana attack with things like mana barbs. Mana barbs, whenever you tap a land, it does the damage to you, regardless of the person that taps the land. But it also has power surge. So at the beginning of your upkeep, you take a damage for each land that you didn't tap during your last set.
Oh my lord.
So you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. These are both enchantments that sit around. And it also has mana flare. The only mana doubler was in red.
Great.
So you have mana doubling, punishment if you do tap, punishment if you don't tap. Like, red really like working around mana, and it still has all these abilities. It still has all these different ways of, like War's Toll and that kind of thing, like effects that stop you from sitting back on all your lands, or make you, or punish you from tapping too many lands, like things like Blood Moon, obviously, and Bad Moon, and Blood Sun.
Yeah.
Not Bad Moon. Bad Moon was the black one. So Blood Sun and Blood Moon are good examples these days of how it still tries to mess around with mana. But it was doing this all the way back in the day. It also had the first Hydra.
Oh, sure. What was the Hydra?
Rock Hydra. So it's red, X. You put, and it comes into play with X heads. That was air quotes again. Sorry, guys. Counters, +1/+1 counters, and then any damage that was dealt, it would lose a counter, and then at the beginning of your upkeep, you can pay red to add a counter.
Sure.
So the idea was so you could cut off a head, but the heads will keep growing back. But it's interesting that the first Hydra was considered.
Yeah, I mean, you do get Hydras in red nowadays, like, still,
yeah,
but they are definitely a green creature
exactly.
type.
Yeah. So that was a little drive-by.
Excellent. Well, you did that in 6 minutes, which is not bad.
That's pretty good.
You were speaking a mile a minute, and I'm very impressed.
Oh, one thing actually also is it did have 2 defenders and 2 regenerators, which is strange for red. Obviously, it doesn't get that anymore. And also, the whole colour in general wasn't working around these weird concepts like with other colours. Other colours, they had these weird cards that you kind of had to try and pick apart. Red's a little bit more, here's a Minotaur.
Yeah, very simple, straight to the point.
And it doesn't, that's it. Here's a Minotaur.
Sure. So I guess the takeaway from looking at Alpha then is that, before I make that point, so in EDH at least, red is kind of seen as being not a tier 1 colour, but also not like a lower tier colour.
No, it's not. It doesn't get the same shit that white does, even though I feel like it really should.
Yeah, but I guess...
Or at least I feel like white should get less shit if red's not getting that much.
But I think red is getting better as it goes, and it has things like Impulsive Draw, it's starting to get more interesting enchantments and all this kind of thing. But I guess when we're looking at Alpha, all the building blocks are still there, because there's nothing that it does really in Alpha that it just doesn't do now.
Yeah, I think Regenerate's the only thing that's outside of its wheelhouse.
But like, black doesn't do things that it did in Alpha.
Yeah, no, of course.
White and blue don't do things that they don't do in Alpha. Oh, excuse me. But red is kind of there. So I think red is kind of almost eternal. And because, as we said at the start of the episode, red is so broad in what it wants to do, and is so broad in its flavour, in its expressions on the cardboard. It's actually pretty fundamental, and it has been to the game ever since Alpha.
Fire is fire.
Yeah, it's great
in terms of
interesting.
In terms of like physical manifestation, then red as mana is quite. It's very obvious.
Yeah,
and then in terms of emotion, in terms of psychology, it is as you say, quite broad, but it tends to also be quite a simple concept that red's always trying to.
But I think that's why it's so easy then to manipulate and to pull into other things, because as long as you have that central sort of idea of passion and of grabbing the moment, however you want to express that, be it for mindless bloodlust to like joyful creativity, you can have anything and everywhere in between. Yeah,
well, as you said, like you could layer over red into most planeswalkers in a moment of their anger or anguish or rage, like a Johnny Vengeant, for example. Like you could feasibly add red to most characters in a moment of them being angry and raging, and it would feel right. Yeah, so you couldn't do that necessarily with other colours.
No, this leads me into what. So we always do this at the end of these episodes. We kind of think about where would we like these colours to go? Yeah. Do we think they need to do anything else, either mechanically or flavourfully? I think mechanically, red is... I mean, it could maybe do with a little bit more ramp, I suppose. Yeah. But then, that is its downfall, which is allowed. It's doing
things like Irencrag feat, and it has, I would say, like through Fires of Invention, it's trying to get around not just the basic... here's some extra lands. Kind of way of doing things.
I think it also maybe for the slightly more battle cruisery formats like EDH, where you've got high life totals, whatever, maybe the damage effects could be a bit more scalable.
Yeah, Area of Flames are kind of a not too bad of a one, but even then that takes some work to get going.
But then, again, it's fine. I think mechanically red is just such a joy to play, and if you put it in, and especially splash it in other colours, then you've got no problem. The thing I want to see flavourfully is exactly what you just mentioned. So before we started recording, I was talking to you about how Planeswalkers and how you kind of change up their colour pies a bit. And I think I took Jace as the example. It'd be quite hard to make Jace into a blue-green, the same way that it was very easy for Nissa to be a blue-green in Amateur.
Yeah.
You couldn't necessarily take someone like Gideon, if you ever got another reprinting, maybe telling like an older story. You would be very hard to do Gideon as a blue-white planeswalker, I think. Whereas red, I think it'd be easier, not necessarily always exactly correct, but it'd be easier to put a red colour pip onto almost any planeswalker.
Yeah,
because at some point in their life, they've been angry, they've been passionate, they've
given
been
the right
vengeful.
motivation, and it works. Red feels, even though it feels more flexible than most colours in terms of what it's willing to embrace.
Yeah,
and I guess that's literally the whole point of red, is it's willing to embrace.
Yeah,
things.
I'd love to see. Although ironically, I think this actually might be the character that will probably be the furthest away from red. But I'd love to see one day like a Gruul Nissa or like a team of Nissa. So blue, green, red. I think that'd be very cool.
We all wanted the girls to do a Super Friends team up, didn't we?
Well, you could do So you like have
the fan arts of
they were very Nissa and Chandra were very shit.
Yeah.
Suppose if you could have you had the Kenrith twins on one card, you could have had the Gruul girls.
Yeah. Right. Anyway, we'll lament. We continue to lament that in our.
Well, Chandra is the character we've always expected her to be, or whatever hell that press.
Oh god, no, she was decidedly interested in muscles.
Yeah, but that was in the book, and then they released a press statement saying, "Oh, she's the character you've always known and loved, whatever that means for you, people of the world." Like, oh, great, what a broad way of not saying anything.
We're gonna get on a touch of that. We're gonna talk about story in general in broader strokes in a couple of episodes. Obviously, we're trying to stay. Pathetically failing, but we're trying to stay focused a little bit on subjects. But we will be looking at this in a broader sense and having more of a general conversation, airing out thoughts rather than talking about subjects that actually have some distinction. Yeah,
be a bit more freeform with some of our subject matters when they call for it. So the plan is over the next few weeks, we've got the pre-release for Theros is literally tonight. So at time of recording, it's pre-release time.
Yep.
We'll see which one we record first, but we may record a Theros flavor review first, or we may finish off our Colour Pie series with green. Either one of those will be the next episode. Then we'll do the flip side of one of those two options, and then we're going to be doing Theros story and what the state of its delivery was and the story itself. And then that same episode will go into a broader discussion of what is going on with Magic's story right now.
Like how it's being handled. And there's obviously clearly a lot of exterior motivations and decisions that are being made that are affecting our game. And obviously this is a point where it's becoming massively more publicised. Obviously Arena is making waves and it's integrating it into what I'd like to call typical society now. It's no longer a niche thing. It is very common. Obviously we're English. In America Magic is massive anyway. But this ubiquitousness of it is going to affect it in some ways. We might lose some of our more beloved geeky parts of it to be more streamlined,
a bit more commercialized.
Exactly. But then at that case, we'll talk about this.
So guys, we are now on Twitter. We've got social media up. We are now also, the podcast is up on many different platforms. So we got Stitcher, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts. We are also on TuneIn, and I think iHeart Radio is still trying to approve us and verify us. We are now on Twitter, so please go to the Twitter. I'm on there every day. Nathan's going to be on there as well. At mtflavouring. You can also find me at Andy Manface, and Nathan, you are?
At Fox in the Moon.
At Fox in the Moon, well remembered. Yeah, your Twitter is a bit of a ghost town at the moment.
It is.
I don't use Twitter. I've literally started in the past couple of weeks.
I'm not social media.
But hit us up on there, guys. We'd love to hear directly from you on all things Magic the Gathering and all things flavour. You can also email us at mtflavouring@gmail.com. So if you want to get in contact with us, that is the best way to do so.
But make sure you have fun this weekend if you are pre-releasing.
Yeah.
The set looks amazing. The set looks bonkers.
The set looks really fun. I can't wait to do some pulls.
So yeah, get some good cards, shove in some decks, sling, battle, win.
Or lose, as long as you're having fun.
As long as you're having fun.
Alright guys, this has been our Red episode. This has been Magic Flavouring. Thank you very much for listening.
See you soon.